I had married the love of my life, but one look from her brother ignited a fire inside me that I couldn't put out. My name is Jake, I'm 32, and a week after my wedding, I found myself trapped in forbidden feelings that threatened to destroy everything. Will I be able to resist the temptation when fate throws us together? My name's Jake. I'm 32, an architect with a steady hand and a quiet life, until last month, when I married Emily, the woman I'd loved since our college days at UW. The wedding was perfect, a crisp Seattle afternoon, the sun breaking through the clouds, her smile lighting up the waterfront venue. I thought I had it all figured out, marriage, a new house, a future we'd sketched out over late-night coffees. But then I met her brother, Nick, properly for the first time, and something inside me shifted, like a fault line waking up after years of sleep. Nick's 35, a firefighter with the kind of presence that fills a room without trying. He's tall, broad-shouldered, with short, sandy brown hair that's always a little messy and hazel eyes that catch the light like they're hiding a secret. I'd seen him before, of course, at family dinners, the rehearsal, the wedding itself, but he'd just been Emily's older brother, a background figure with a quick grin. That changed the day we moved into our new place in Capitol Hill, a fixer-upper we'd snagged for cheap. Emily was unpacking dishes, and Nick showed up to help haul boxes, his pickup truck loaded with our stuff. "Never thought marrying my sister would come with a gym membership," he quipped, hoisting a box of books like it weighed nothing. Sweat glistened on his forearms, the August sun beating down as we shuffled between the truck and the house. I laughed, wiping my brow. "Someone's gotta do the heavy lifting," I shot back, aiming for casual, but my voice came out softer, unsteady. He turned to me, that grin flashing, sharp, alive, and for a split second, his eyes locked on mine. It wasn't just a look. It was a jolt, a current that hit me square in the chest and left me blinking, dazed. I shook it off. It was nothing, I told myself, just the heat, the chaos of moving day. Emily called us in for water, and we fell into a rhythm, unpacking, joking, settling into the house that was supposed to be our fresh start. But Nick kept finding reasons to stick around. He'd grab a beer from the fridge, lean against the counter, and toss out stories, rescuing a dog from a burning shed, the time he broke his arm skateboarding as a kid. His voice, low and warm, pulled me in, and I'd catch myself staring a little too long at the way his hands moved when he talked, rough from work but deliberate. That night, after Emily crashed early from exhaustion, Nick and I ended up on the porch, the city humming faintly below. He cracked open another beer, handed me one, and said, "You're all right, Jake? Glad you're in the family?" Simple words, but the way he said them, his gaze steady, almost searching, made my pulse kick up. "Yeah, you too," I mumbled, taking a swig to cover the heat creeping up my neck. We sat there, the air thick with summer and something I couldn't name, until he clapped me on the shoulder and headed home. His touch lingered, a phantom weight I couldn't shake. The next few days, Emily threw herself into her new marketing gig, leaving the house quiet. Nick started dropping by more, bringing tools to fix a leaky faucet, helping me sand down the banister. It was innocent enough, or so I thought. One afternoon, we were in the garage, sorting through paint cans for the kitchen. He handed me a roller, his fingers brushing mine, and I froze. "You're gonna make a mess if you hold it like that," he teased, stepping closer to adjust my grip. His breath was warm, his shoulder grazing mine, and my heart slammed against my ribs. "Show me then," I said, voice low, daring him without meaning to. He smirked, guiding my hand, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the heat of his skin, the faint scent of smoke and cedar clinging to him. I pulled back, muttering something about checking the paint color, and he let it go with a laugh. But that laugh, it echoed in my head all night, a sound I couldn't unhear. Emily came home late, kissed me goodnight, and I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Admiration, maybe? He was her brother, my brother-in-law, a guy I'd see at Thanksgiving and barbecues. That's all it was. Except it wasn't. The spark had caught, and I didn't know it yet, but it was about to set everything ablaze. The days after the move blurred into a rhythm of unpacking and settling in, but Nick's presence stuck like static in the air. Emily's new job at the startup swallowed her time, early mornings, late nights, leaving our Capitol Hill house feeling half empty. I didn't mind the quiet at first. I'd sketched blueprints in the dining room, the Seattle rain tapping the windows, until Nick would show up, unannounced, with a six-pack or a toolbox. "Thought you might need a hand," he'd say, and I'd nod, letting him in, even though I knew I should have said no. He became a fixture, fixing the creaky porch step, hauling junk to the curb, his laugh bouncing off the bare walls. It was easy to write off as brotherly duty, him looking out for Emily's new husband. But then there were the moments that didn't fit. Like when he'd pass me a wrench, his fingers lingering against mine, or when he'd lean close to point out a crack in the drywall, his voice dropping low, almost intimate. My stomach would twist, a mix of guilt and something sharper, something I couldn't name but felt in my bones. One evening, Emily texted she'd be stuck at the office till midnight, prepping for a pitch. Nick was already there, sprawled on the couch with a beer, flipping through channels. "Guess it's just us," he said, grinning, and I shrugged, grabbing a bottle to join him. We landed on some old action flick, the kind with explosions and zero plot, but I barely watched. My eyes kept drifting to him, the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders, the faint scar on his knuckles from a fire call he'd mentioned once. He caught me staring, raised an eyebrow. "What's up, Jake?" "Nothing," I lied too quick. He chuckled, a deep sound that hit me like a punch, and shifted closer. "You're a bad liar." His tone was teasing, but his gaze held mine, steady, searching. I swallowed, the room suddenly too small, the air too thick. "Just tired," I muttered, standing to escape to the kitchen. He followed, casual as ever, leaning against the counter while I fumbled with a glass of water. "You sure that's it?" he pressed, and I felt his eyes on me, peeling back layers I wasn't ready to show. I turned, forcing a laugh. "What else would it be?" But he didn't answer, just watched me, his smirk fading into something softer, something dangerous. The silence stretched, electric, until the front door clicked open. Emily, home early, her voice cutting through the haze. "Hey boys!" Nick stepped back, seamless, and I exhaled, guilt flooding in with the relief. The next twist came a few days later. We were painting the kitchen, Emily's idea, though she'd bailed for a meeting. Nick and I worked side by side, rollers streaking the walls sage green. He was mid-story, something about a rookie firefighter screwing up, when he flicked paint at me, a splatter hitting my cheek. "You're hopeless, Jake," he laughed, stepping close to wipe it off with his thumb. His touch was warm, deliberate, and I froze, breath catching as his hand hovered there, inches from my jaw. "Better?" he asked, voice low, his hazel eyes glinting with mischief, and something deeper. Yeah?" I managed, stepping back, but my pulse raced like I'd sprinted a mile. He smirked, turning to the wall, but the air buzzed, charged with whatever we weren't saying. I tried to focus, dip the roller, paint the wall, but my hands shook, and when he brushed past me to grab a can, his arm grazed mine, sending a jolt straight through me. "Teach me how it's done, then," I said, half joking, half daring him to close the gap again. He did, guiding my hand over the wall, his chest so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Like this," he murmured, and for a heartbeat I thought he'd turn, that something would snap. But he pulled back, grinning like it was nothing, and I cursed myself for wanting more. Emily got home an hour later, gushing about the color, oblivious to the storm brewing under her roof. That night, I lay awake next to her, her breathing soft and steady, while my mind replayed Nick's touch, his voice, the way he looked at me. I told myself it was admiration, respect for a guy who ran into fires, who carried himself like nothing could touch him. But the lie tasted bitter, and my chest ached with a truth I couldn't face. Then came the kicker. Emily breezed in the next morning, coffee in hand, and dropped it casual as anything. "I've got a work trip next week, Portland 5 days. Nick said he'd crash here, keep you company." She smiled, trusting, while my stomach plummeted. "Sounds good," I said, voice tight, and Nick shot me a look across the table, quick, unreadable, but enough to make my blood hum. 5 days alone with him. The thought was a match, and I was already burning. Emily's work trip hit like a countdown. 5 days alone with Nick in our Capitol Hill house, the rain-streaked windows closing us in. She left on a Monday, her suitcase rolling out the door as she hugged me goodbye. "Don't let Nick burn the place down," she teased, oblivious to the fire already smoldering. He showed up an hour later, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, that easy grin masking whatever churned beneath. "Guess you're stuck with me, Jake," he said, and I forced a smile, my chest tight with a mix of dread and something I hated myself for feeling. The first day was normal enough, too normal, like we were both trying too hard. We cooked tacos, watched a Mariners game, kept the conversation light, his job, my latest project, the weather. But the air hummed, every glance a spark threatening to catch. By Wednesday, the pretense cracked. We'd spent the day sanding the deck, the Seattle drizzle holding off just long enough. Nick worked shirtless, his skin glistening with sweat, and I caught myself staring, his shoulders flexing, the faint scars crisscrossing his back. He noticed, tossed me a smirk. "Eyes up, Jake," he said, and I laughed it off, but my face burned. That night, he suggested the gym, a spot near Pike Place with a decent sauna. "We've earned it," he said, voice casual, but his eyes dared me to say no. I didn't. We hit the weights, the clank of metal drowning out my racing thoughts, then filed into the sauna, just the two of us. The heat swallowed us whole, steam curling around the cedar walls. Nick leaned back, towel loose around his waist, sweat beading on his chest. I kept my gaze on the floor, but it didn't help. The air felt alive, heavy with him. "Ever feel something pulling you, even when you know you shouldn't listen?" he asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, a rumble that cut through the hiss of steam. I looked up, caught by those hazel eyes, now dark and unguarded. My throat tightened. "Yeah," I admitted, barely a whisper. "Every damn day since I met you." The words slipped out, raw and reckless, and his breath hitched. He sat up, closing the space between us, the heat of his skin eclipsing the saunas. "Me too," he said, and before I could think, his hand found my jaw, rough, warm, and he kissed me. It was brief, fierce, a collision of lips, his firm against mine, tasting of salt and want. My hand slid to his neck, fingers tangling in damp hair, and for that second, the world dissolved into heat and heartbeat. Then reality slammed back. We broke apart, gasping, eyes locked in a silent storm. "We can't," he rasped, voice cracking, and I nodded, though every nerve screamed otherwise. "I know," I said, but it was a lie. I didn't know anything anymore, except that I wanted him closer. We left the sauna, dressed in silence, the weight of it pressing down like the rain now pelting the streets. Back home, we acted normal, cooked pasta, cracked beers, but every move was a tightrope. I'd catch his gaze across the counter, and he'd look away, jaw tight. Thursday blurred by, a haze of avoidance, until Friday night snapped us back. Emily called, her voice bright through the speaker. "Miss you guys! Home tomorrow." Nick's eyes met mine, a flicker of panic mirroring my own. "Miss you too," I said, but the words felt hollow. After she hung up, Nick stood, pacing. It's messing me up, Jake," he said, stopping inches from me. His hands flexed, like he was fighting to keep them still. "I can't stop thinking about you, and it's killing me." My pulse roared. "Same," I confessed, stepping closer, the space between us crackling. "But she's your sister." "My wife." He nodded, pained, and for a moment I thought he'd kiss me again. Instead, he turned away, grabbing his jacket. "I need air," he muttered, and the door slammed behind him. He didn't come back that night. I sat on the couch, replaying the sauna, the kiss, his words, until dawn broke gray over the city. When he returned, coffee in hand, his eyes were shadowed. "We need to figure this out," he said, voice low, resolute. "Before she's back." I nodded, heart pounding, knowing whatever came next would shatter something, maybe everything. Nick's words hung in the air. "We need to figure this out." As the Seattle dawn crept through the blinds, painting the living room in muted gray. Emily was due back in hours, and the house felt like a pressure cooker, every creak amplifying the chaos in my head. I'd barely slept, the memory of that sauna kiss searing my skin, his lips, the heat, the way we'd pulled back but not far enough. Nick stood by the window, coffee untouched, his silhouette sharp against the drizzle. "I shouldn't have left last night," he said, voice rough. "But I couldn't stay there." I nodded, throat tight. "Where'd you go?" He shrugged, eyes distant. "Drove around. Ended up at the pier, watching the ferries." Thinking. He turned, hazel gaze locking on mine, raw and unsteady. About you. About us. My stomach flipped, a mix of fear and longing I couldn't untangle. There's no us, Nick, I said, but it sounded weak, like I was trying to convince myself. He stepped closer, the space between us shrinking. Isn't there? He asked, and I had no answer, because he was right. There was something, and it was clawing its way out. Emily's return hit like a cold snap. She burst in at noon, all smiles and travel stories, dropping her bag by the door. You two survive without me? She teased, hugging Nick, then me. Her warmth burned, guilt twisting my gut as I caught Nick's eye over her shoulder, a quick, shared flash of something dark. Barely, he joked, but his voice was tight, and I saw the strain in his jaw. She didn't notice, chattering about Portland, oblivious to the fault lines under her feet. That night, she insisted on a welcome home dinner, just us three. We cooked salmon, the kitchen filling with the scent of lemon and dill, but the normalcy felt like a mask. Emily laughed, pouring wine, while Nick and I moved like ghosts, avoiding each other's orbit. Then it happened. She stepped out to take a work call, leaving us alone with the dishes. Our hands brushed over the sink, a jolt shooting up my arm, and he froze, soap dripping from his fingers. Jake, he whispered, turning, his face so close I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. I can't keep pretending. Neither can I admitted, voice shaking, and for a heartbeat, I thought we'd crossed that line again. But her footsteps snapped us apart, and we plastered on smiles as she returned, oblivious. The rest of dinner was a blur, her stories, our forced nods, until she yawned and headed to bed. Night, boys, she called, leaving us in the dim living room, the air thick with what we couldn't say. The next twist came fast. Saturday, Emily planned a housewarming party, friends, neighbors, a dozen people crammed into our half-finished space. Nick arrived late, sleeves rolled up, carrying a case of beer. He moved through the crowd, all charm and easy laughs, but his eyes kept finding mine, sharp, loaded. I was pouring drinks when he slid up beside me, handing me a glass. His fingers grazed mine, deliberate, and he leaned in, voice low under the chatter. You okay, Jake? The question was simple, but his tone wasn't, soft, daring, a thread pulling taut. Fine, I lied, my grip tightening on the bottle. He smirked, like he saw through me, and Emily swooped in, linking arms with us both. My favorite guys! She beamed, and I felt Nick tense, his smile faltering. The party buzzed on, but every time he brushed past, grabbing a plate, refilling a drink, the air sparked, a silent countdown ticking down. Then it broke. Guests trickled out, and Emily offered to drive a tipsy friend home, leaving Nick and me to clean. The silence was deafening as we stacked plates, until our hands collided over a tray. He didn't pull back. This is tearing me apart, he said, voice low, raw, stepping so close I could feel his breath. I want you here, but it's killing me to hide it. My heart slammed against my ribs. I feel it too, I confessed, and his hand twitched, like he might reach for me. Headlights flashed through the window, Emily, and he stepped back, cursing under his breath. Sunday, he texted, meet me. My place. Now. I shouldn't have gone, but I did. His Belltown apartment was all exposed brick and chaos, gear strewn across the floor, a view of the Sound glinting through the rain. He met me on the balcony, the sunset bleeding orange across the sky. I talked to Emily last night, he said, voice trembling. Told her I need space, that I'm lost. Not the whole truth, but enough. My pulse spiked. What's that mean? I asked, stepping closer, the wind tugging at us. He looked at me, eyes fierce. It means I'm done lying about this, about you. And then he kissed me again, hard, desperate, his hands framing my face. It was over in seconds, but it left me reeling, the city spinning below. The kiss on Nick's balcony lingered like smoke, curling through my veins as the Seattle skyline glowed orange below. His hands dropped from my face, but his eyes, hazel, stormy, held me there, pinned between hope and havoc. I'm done lying about this, about you, he'd said, and the words echoed, a lifeline and a grenade all at once. I stumbled back, breathless. What now? I asked, voice cracking. He shook his head, jaw tight. I don't know, Jake. But I can't keep running from it. Neither could I. Emily was home when I got back, curled up with a book, the house quiet except for the rain tapping the roof. "You're late," she said, smiling, but her eyes flicked over me, searching, maybe sensing the tremor I couldn't hide. "Yeah, grabbed a drink with Nick," I lied, the words sour on my tongue. She nodded, trusting, and I sank onto the couch, guilt gnawing at me. That night, I lay beside her, her breathing soft, while my mind raced. Nick's lips, his confession, the mess we'd made. Sleep never came. Monday hit hard. Nick didn't show up, didn't text, and the silence was a blade twisting deeper. Emily hummed through breakfast, planning a weekend hike, oblivious to the war inside me. I nodded along, but every bite of toast tasted like ash. Then the phone rang. "Nick? Meet me at the pier," he said, voice low, urgent. "We can't dodge this anymore." My stomach dropped, but I went, telling Emily I'd run an errand. She kissed me goodbye, her lips a reminder of the life I was risking. He was waiting by the water, hands stuffed in his jacket, the sound churning gray behind him. I told her more. He said, not looking at me. "Last night. Said I'm moving out of the city for a bit, need to clear my head." My heart lurched. "Did you?" He cut me off, eyes snapping to mine. "No. Not about us. But she knows something's off. Asked if I'm okay, if we're okay." He laughed, bitter. "Told her I'm figuring it out." I exhaled, relief warring with dread. "And me?" I asked. He stepped closer, voice dropping. "That's up to you, Jake." The choice clawed at me. Emily, my wife, the vows I'd made, versus Nick, this pull I couldn't shake. "I can't lose her," I said, but it sounded hollow, and he saw it. "Then why were you here?" he challenged, and I had no answer, just the ache in my chest. We stood there, the wind whipping between us, until he sighed. "I'm leaving tomorrow. Tacoma, maybe further. If you're staying with her, I won't make it harder." He turned to go, but I grabbed his arm, the contact electric. "Wait." That night I came clean, halfway. Over dinner, I told Emily I was struggling, that something felt off since the move. Her face softened, hand finding mine. "Is it us?" she asked, voice small. "No," I lied, then faltered. "It's me. I need time too." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Take it. Just don't shut me out." Then, the twist, she looked at me steady. "Nick said the same thing? Whatever's going on, I want you both happy." My breath caught. Did she know? Suspect? Her words hung, a fragile bridge I didn't deserve. Nick left the next day. I drove him to the station, the truck silent except for the hum of the engine. At the curb, he paused, bag slung over his shoulder. "If you ever figure it out, you know where I'll be," he said, and his hand brushed mine, one last spark, before he walked away. I watched him board the bus, a piece of me going with him, then drove home to Emily. She greeted me with coffee and a smile, and we fell into routine, dinners, hikes, quiet nights. But his absence carved a hollow I couldn't fill. Weeks later, a postcard came, Tacoma, a scribbled note, still thinking. I tucked it in a drawer, unopened to Emily, and kept moving forward. We never crossed that line again, Nick and I, but what we'd had, those stolen glances, that kiss, lived in the margins, a truth too real to erase. Emily's love held me, steady and warm, but Nick's ghost lingered, a question without an answer. On that pier, we'd chosen, not everything, not nothing, and somehow, it was enough.